Good news for homeowners this morning, with new data revealing property values across the country set to rise by 5% this year. Samantha Pote reports.
Prices here are set to increase by more than 8%, have increased over 8% over the last 12 months, with senior economists from PropTrack predicting the opposite. It's great news for sellers, but not so good for the buyers, with more than 40 suburbs in Greater Sydney now surpassing the $1 million mark in terms of median values. Parramatta and North Parramatta are among the biggest winners, enjoying spikes of more than 14%, while Vaucluse still holds the title as the most expensive suburb in Sydney, with a median house price of around $10 million. If we take a broader look nationwide, Perth jumped 15%, Adelaide and Brisbane are up 11%, and 10% respectively, and Melbourne recorded a 1% increase. Driving around Parramatta this morning, we've seen a number of property owners looking to cash in on these rising prices, and the confidence for sellers is set to continue in 2024.
Well, it's interesting, isn't it? You're getting mixed reports right across the place when it comes to housing. Now, we are joined by Australian Housing and Urban Research Institute Managing Director, Michael Fotheringham. Michael, how are you?
Good morning, Tim.
What's your take? Is it good news or is it medium news? What are we thinking for house owners at the moment?
I was interested by that package. Look, it's good news for existing homeowners, sure, but for people aspiring to get into home ownership, to buy a first home or to get a larger home because the family's growing, it's not good news at all. It's house prices are growing much faster than wages are. Housing is becoming more and more unaffordable. So while it is good for those who already have property in their portfolio, not so good for those trying to get into the market.
Well, let's go back before we go forward. 2023, and there was interest rate rises left, right and centre, of course, and this followed the RBA saying there won't be any rate rises till late 2024, and then we just saw it go out of control. But despite that pressure, we saw property prices really push back and push up.
That's right. I mean, I think Australians' appetite for home ownership has not abated, and while we weren't expecting quite the level of interest rate rises we saw over the last 12 months, they certainly haven't stopped people from wanting to get their own home. So, the increase in prices reflects that growing appetite.
Do you think that there will be a time somewhere through the course of this new year that the pinch will happen, where people and the interest rates, cost of living and everything else that's sort of spiralling will hit, because there is constant talk now that there may be a few more interest rate rises before we see any plateauing or any downturn in interest rates?
Yeah, look, I'm not going to pretend to know what the Reserve Bank's going to do over the next 12 months, but I think what we do know is there is still a lot of demand for housing. Supply is not keeping up with that demand, so there'll be upward pressure on prices throughout the year. I mean, I think what's interesting over the last 12 months is a changing pattern across the country of how that's been expressed. So, Perth and Brisbane have very large growth in prices. Sydney quite strong too, despite already having a very high base to work from. Other capital cities not quite as strong, but still working much higher than they had been pre-pandemic. But the region's much softer growth. So while there were upward movement of prices in most parts of the country, the regions were calmer than the capital cities in the last 12 months. That's a change in pattern from what we've seen over the last few years, where lots of people have been moving to the regions. So there's some changing patterns about where people are choosing to live.
Are we seeing changes in investment patterns, particularly those that are looking for their first home, that are deciding to buy outside where they want to live and then renting?
Well, we've certainly been seeing that over the last few years. A lot more people moving to the regions, as I said. The ability to telecommute, to work remotely has opened up that possibility for a lot more people than perhaps was the case 5 years ago. So, we're seeing that shift in pattern. For aspiring first home buyers, it's getting tougher. They're needing to be much more creative in how to get a deposit together, because the amount of money you need for a deposit grows with the price. So, it's getting harder and harder for those wanting to get into the market.
And talking about hard, what about the rental market?
Well, this is one of the knock-on effects, isn't it? That we have both the interest rates have put upward pressure, but the competition in the market, the very low vacancy rate right across the country. It's been hovering around the 1% mark in most parts of the country for the best part of a year now. that's pretty much unprecedented in this country. And so that pressure on the rental market, that competition for places, pushes prices up. Landlords in most parts of the country are not allowed to ask for rent bidding, but there's nothing stopping tenants from doing that unsolicited. So often they'll offer more and more rent to try and secure a property, pay a year in advance, those sorts of things. It's a really tough market to find a rental now.
You mentioned first home buyers at the start and then again in the last answer. What happens now? What happens with this creativity that you mentioned? Is it we buy in a country town and we rent in the city? Is it we do this somewhere else in the same city and live in another house because we can't afford where we want to live?
Yeah, look, there are some really important structural questions there. I mean, we have a relatively small number of cities, of economic centres in this country that employment is centred around, and ideally we'd have twice as many major economic centres that people could be living in, and not having the large commutes that we end up with across these very large cities. But that's a structural issue for the whole nation that'll take many years to resolve. In the meantime, we need to look at ways that households can get into home ownership. For many years we've been using first homeowner grants, but we know that they actually put upward pressure on prices in and of themselves and really only benefit the existing homeowners rather than aspiring homeowners. What we need to do is programs like the shared equity program that have been working in Western Australia and South Australia for many years. There's a national proposal for that, for the Help to Buy program, that is actually a good proposal. We need to see those sorts of initiatives moving forward.
Finally, and we see it at a federal level, we see it at a state level, they all want to just build more, and that makes sense, but there's also challenges inside the construction industry.
Absolutely. Look, we've had supply chain issues since the start of the pandemic. They're starting to ease in some parts. We're also starting to use alternative supply chains, use different materials, be a bit more innovative in our build, a lot more off-site construction. That's really helpful and fast. But there's a workforce challenge as well. And so we need to have trainee programs, apprenticeship programs, and be really smart about our migration program to be bringing in the skills we need to build the homes we want to live in.
Good to chat, Michael. Thanks for coming on the program. Have a top weekend.
Thank you, Tim.